Welcome to my review of the Wilson Blade Pro 1619. In this review, I'll touch on some direct comparisons to the Blade V7 1820, the original Pro Stock Wilson H22 and the RF97. This racket is notoriously one of the most sought out rackets for racket nerds or advanced level players, and there are definitely reasons why. If you're not into advanced, low power, control orientated and heavy rackets, you might want to pass on this one. If you like my content, please like the video and consider subscribing to my channel to see the other reviews of the ProLab rackets and many more. My Instagram is in the description, so follow me there if you want more consistent updates. The reason why this review is so detailed is because these rackets can be quite finicky, more so than most other rackets on the retail market, because retail models can usually be played in stock form. However, the Blade Pro, like the Ultra Pro, is very subjective to the player's preference of their specs and skill level. I tried to cover a variety of bases to give you the best idea of what the racket is about, because it'll be difficult to demo. I've logged legitimately over 20 hours of play in these last couple of weeks purely for testing, with different string setups, tensions and weight distributions, to help you understand if this racket is for you and what it could play like closer in a more user-friendly setup. Quick recap for those who aren't aware, the Wilson Blade Pro is based off a custom-make racket called the H22. Only players that had contracts with Wilson were able to access them, and the only way typically to get one was off the second-hand market, but it generally went for twice the price of the common retail racket, which is why this is a big deal since it's never been released and now is available at a normal retail price. I believe this racket was made to be a direct competitor to Head's liquid metal Radical Tour model, which Djokovic has used in the past and now uses in some modified form or another, and is currently used by top players like Karen Khachanov and Pablo Carreño Busta. So without further ado, let's dive into the specs in stock form. It comes in at 305 grams unstrung with a 32cm balance point and a 65 RA rating, which drops down to about 62 after it's strung. The swing weight on average is between 333 to 336 and the beam width is 21.5mm. If you want to hear about how this racket handles without any customization, please check my first impressions video, I'll link it to the top right. In terms of quality control, the quality control is a hit or miss on this racket. Unfortunately, you have to pay top dollar for it in terms of retail price, which is still expensive, but if you're lucky enough to get a manageable swing weight, you will not regret it. This is because the swing weight comes in stock quite high, and Wilson is not the most reputable brand when it comes to their spec tolerances. Even the slightest spec variation at this kind of swing weight could really ruin the experience. As for me, the swing weight runs around my maximum spec that I play with already, so it would be tough to handle anything that's out of spec. I believe you can return it for free, but yes, that is the biggest downside to this release. It's just having to worry about whether or not you'll be given a wacky spec, which is such a shame because this racket is truly a wonder. For my string testing, my string setups, I used a variation of 3 different string types that I've listed on the screen at slightly different tensions. I used a very stiff poly, a poly hybrid setup with a multi-filament string, and a soft spin friendly poly. This is what I found overall. Even at 62 RA stiffness rating, a stiff poly string, even strung at 48 pounds, can still potentially cause issues to those who have previously experienced tennis elbow or wrist issues if you have a history of it. I was just able to get through a 2-hour play session with a stiff poly, but I was feeling it a little bit too much halfway through my session. But if you are healthy and prefer that type of feel, there's no reason why you might not like it, and obviously in comparison, it'll still be considered soft compared to those stiff babblets. I found anything above 50 pounds, the racket would start to feel a little bit too boardy for my liking, and you'll start to cross over that line of balance between comfort and not enough power. Also note that this is accounting for the spring type of weather, where it's not too hot, not too cold. So in a hot summer or a cold winter, you'll probably be moving up or down a couple pounds. Personally, I thought around 45 to 48 was the perfect range for combining comfort, control and power, but that's more for people who like to string similar to me. Too much higher and it would start to take away from the excellent feel. Too much lower and you'll begin to spray more shots. Also, even without a sharp poly or a textured full bed of poly strings, a multi-hybrid paired with a good quality poly will provide you with that excellent comfort and feel, but nearly no noticeable detriment to spin potential. The modifications I tinkered with mainly was to do with the balance. I experimented with adding 15 grams straight to the butt cap. I also added 7 grams to the butt cap and 8 grams to the top of the handle, and I added some weight to 3 and 9 o'clock. I found no significant differences in a balance point between 31.5cm and 32cm for my game style, but there have been very minor improvements in the plow and stability between the two different handle distributions. Both greatly improved my timing and usability on serves, volleys and ground strokes, particularly my one-handed backhand. The weight in the hoop was a significant difference in power for the serve, but did start to have a detrimental effect on my ground stroke swing speed. The extra weight in the hoop also was fantastic for a slightly missing part of stability, which ended up bringing it up to the likes of the RF97. For the feel and stiffness, there are many different types of H22 rackets, depends on how they've been composed, namely the material that is used when making the racket. For the Blade Pro, Wilson are opting for the higher end of the stiffness rating for a H22. As many as I've seen, played or read about, they've been around the 55 to 58 stiffness mark. My guess is to help modernize the frame and make it a tad more user-friendly than the Pro Stock versions, which commonly come in a more flexible form. I personally like that Wilson did this, as it perfectly blends enough flexibility for amazing comfort and feel, but enough stiffness that doesn't make the racket feel like it's too bendy or hard to connect with. Though the flexibility mainly comes from the throat of the racket, it does slightly make it feel a little bit more muted, but not in a way that you would actually call the racket itself muted. It is one of the top 5 best feeling rackets currently on market. It has a small amount of ball pocketing, but plays predominantly crisp or point and shoot. The V7 blade, whilst better than the countervail, is still a very muted racket and one of the most muted rackets you can currently find. Whilst the V7 1820 has a very similar spec to the Blade Pro, the biggest difference you are wanting from the Blade Pro is the unique and infinitely better feel that it provides. The feel of this racket is just unmatched. The racket really enhances the feel of the string that you set it up with. Although that may sound like a no-brainer, it's not like a pure drive that can feel hollow and brassy, therefore requiring a more comfortable string, and not like the V7 blade that is muted so much that you need a very crisp string to balance it out, where you need to remove the dampener just to get more feedback from the racket. Whether you want a stiffer, muted or more comfortable feel, you just use the string that you want and the feel will follow. It stays true to exactly what you string it with. Placing 15 grams into the handle and bringing the racket to a headlight balance of 32 centimeters or lower really did wonders for my game. You might say that it's an obvious assumption to improve that balance point to make it user friendly, but I didn't have the same level of success with the E-Zone Tour, where I did the exact same thing, and despite it being a lower swing weight, it was not anywhere as easy for me to move around. It's likely to do with the beam width being 21.5mm box beam, but my backhand is now as good as it has been with any racket in comparison to the E-Zone Tour that I struggled quite a lot with. For the first session, once I made the change, I felt right at home, even though this is above my preferred static weight and swing weight. Usually moving beyond 345 grams and 330 swing weight can become slightly more sluggish for my particular game style that relies on racket head speed, but this still feels quite easy to handle. Now, after logging more than 20 hours with the frame, I've now built up the foundational strength to handle the weight for ground strokes for long sessions. Serves is a little bit of a different story, but I'll get to that later. The source of the Blade Pro's power comes from plow through and mass, and not free power. There is no free power in this racket. You need to really step into the ball, have good technique, and swing completely through the racket. If you try to cheat with your wrist or arm the ball, you just won't be able to get enough out of the racket. Power is slightly but noticeably higher than the Blade V7 1820, but on full swings the amount of penetration on flat drives absolutely zips through the court and is so much better than the V7. Comparing it to one of the other heavier rackets that I own, its penetration is just as good as the RF97, using pure mass to rip the ball through the court. Now to me it's quite surprising given that RF97 is quite a stiffer racket, but it might just be because the Blade Pro is actually slightly easier to use and handle than the RF, so just being able to maintain a faster racket head speed to produce more power is probably what helps. Now the thing is, with all these advanced orientated rackets, once you have them weighted up similar enough, they all share similar capabilities and power, and is only noticeably different if you pay really close attention. This brings us to spin and launch angle. So what is actually noticeable difference between these rackets are the differences in spin penetration and the launch angle. Obviously this can also be affected by string choice, but the Blade Pro out of these advanced orientated rackets had the most combination of penetrating spin and plow through. Now it's not some kind of spin monster, but it still does a very good job when you consider it being a flexible control racket. The launch angle is slightly on the higher side, but I feel that is not overdone given how spaced out the 1619 pattern is. In comparison, the Wilson Blade 1820 had quite a lower launch angle and the spin being received was a lot more dull, and as I mentioned in my review, the ball could tend to sit in the opponent's strike zone a lot more often. Now we are talking about the differences between open and closed patterns, but for those who are interested in a heavier spec of the 1820 but wanted a more open pattern like the 1619 but needed more control, this is the kind of direction you can expect the Blade Pro to be. I found the Ultra Pro 1619 had a similar enough launch angle to the Blade Pro, but there was no penetration in the spin, and similarly sat up in the opponent's hitting zone on balls that weren't driven through the court. After doing more slicing with the racket, you may find that if you don't make good contact, the ball is going to float a lot. However, depth is very easy to come by. It's the one shot that you aren't required to fully swing through and time perfectly to achieve great depth. But if you want a nice skidding slice and not for it to float long, you need to concentrate when you make contact to really slice down on the ball. I found it to work beautifully for both offensive and defensive situations and helped me stay in many rallies. When making super clean contact with the ball, depth is so easy to come by, and combined with the spin, you'll find that it's quite easy to drive a ball deep, but it has enough spin potential that you can get the ball to dive back down even when it might look like it's sailing long. As I mentioned in my first impressions video, you need to take full cuts at the ball, and when you begin to get dialed into the racket and how you need to move and how to time the ball with this racket, confident full form swing and well-timed stroke will reward you with great angles, depth and precision for hitting the lines. Just be wary that once timing and understanding of how to utilize this racket increases, it is easier to hit long just because depth, as I said, is so easy to come by. Finally, when you are stretched out wide or you're late or having a cramped swing, just know that it's going to dump very short if you don't hit the center. For those of you who aren't used to heavier rackets, for serving you'll really need to spend much more time playing matches or constantly practicing serves to gather the shoulder strength. That's probably where the swinging the racket becomes the most tiring, similar to the RF97. However, with the improved balance, serve did greatly improve, and it does provide a very solid and penetrating serve for both flat and kick serves if you really get your body into it and swing with the proper speed. But if you really want to unlock the full potential of the serves, I would recommend adding either an extra 2 grams of weight at 12 o'clock or 4 grams total at 3 and 9 o'clock. You will see quite a large difference in the effectiveness of your serve, and also how much less effort is required to provide a very powerful serve. You can see in these videos, I'm just using my upper body strength and swing speed to generate the pace because my ankle was a bit unstable in that session, but just the swing alone is able to provide very fast, flat skidding serves. Now that I was able to swing and time the ball more to my liking and game style, it really opened up the ease of timing and forgiveness for the frame. Obviously, when you're hampered by balance or swing weight, your timing is going to be sluggish and off-center shots will not be kind to you at all. But once I made the modifications necessary to match my game, I found that timing no longer became an issue, and whilst the racket still requires great technique and a great deal of racket head speed to achieve power and depth, it was nowhere near glaring of an issue as it was in stock form. Now that I'm dialed in, I don't find the frame as unforgiving in terms of off-center shots, but this just goes to show you that demoing the racket will truly do you no justice if you don't at least try to commit to it. The full potential can only be realized once you understand everything that you need to do to utilize this frame, as well as finding your preferred spec range. Stability is almost as rock solid as the RF97. It's not quite there without a little added weight, but very close, and I think more than enough if you have great timing. Normally I enjoy my light frames and have no issues with their low swing weight and stability, but the feel combined with the stability of this is just so enjoyable to use. Going back to the other frame makes everything feel anemic and almost hollow. Whether you go all out on a dry forehand or block an oncoming heavy pace serve, it feels like carving through butter. It is both smooth and rock solid that the feel is just purely addicting. Also, if you're no stranger to high swing weight, I definitely recommend adding a tiny amount of weight to 3 and 9 to help with that extra 10% of stability that's missing. As I mentioned, it really adds to the serve as well. So contrary to my first impressions, as I kind of speculated, balance is what affected me the most. It's much nicer to volley with now, being able to get the racket through on time and into the right position. However, you do need to focus on getting quite flush in the center, as off center causes it to twist ever so slightly. I still do stick with what I said in that the Ultra Pro was nicer to volley with, but that's probably because it was more user friendly. Just because I know a lot of you out there will be a much better and stronger volleyer than I am and probably won't have any problems with the Blade Pro at all. Now the biggest question is, how does it stack up against a H22? As for playing characteristics, they really played almost identical. In terms of the ball that was being produced, the spin, the penetration, it was all very similar. After playing with them side by side, I'd have to say the biggest differences in the rackets just comes down to the feel. And that is purely a preference at best, since the Blade Pro feels amazing already. The feel obviously is highly manipulated by specs, weight distribution, and as I mentioned, string choice really affects the feel to how you want it to play. So in my opinion, apart from spec tolerances, Wilson has truly released basically what is a H22 in a different layout, and it still works and plays just as good as any high quality racket out there. At an amateur level, I think the Blade Pro best suits players who are very aggressive. That's because it's not the type of racket you want to be caught off balance with or late. So you want it to be the one who makes the aggressive move so you can stay on top of your swing. I think it possibly works even better with people who have efficient but fast and full strokes. The faster you can get the racket massed through the air, the more forgiving it will be. The loopier your strokes are, the more punishing it can be. But at a higher level of 5.0 and above, where their offense is balanced out with their defense and great movement, this is definitely a racket that would defend at a high level if you play at a high level. Before you buy, just know what you're getting into with the quality control from Wilson, but also the huge demand of physical stamina this racket requires. The full potential of this frame can be unlocked if you put the work in, but just as likely it will expose everything that is wrong in your game if you don't. I thought that this racket wouldn't suit me too well when I first bought it, but after rigorous playtesting, it has now become one of my favorite rackets ever, from its rock solid stability to its unique feel. For you racket lovers out there who have never had the chance to try a H22, this is your chance to play one of the highest quality player frames to ever exist. That concludes my review of the Blade Pro 1619. Stick to the end to see my rating that I give it in stock form and my preferred spec. My next upcoming review will be the ProLabs Ultra Pro 16x19, 6195 and the new ProStaff 97. If you have any preference of which one you would like to see next, give me a comment below and I'll see if there's enough preference for one and I'll skip right to that one. Thanks for tuning in again for my review. I'll catch you guys next time.